Tractor trailers work in the harshest elements, and over time conditions arise that can affect the electronics of the electric tarp opening systems. We'll go through some of the steps to troubleshoot common problems that can arise. The easiest step to take when troubleshooting is to unplug the male plug from the trailer and leave it unplugged for 30 seconds. Then plug it back in. This will reset the control box. Again, if the motor doesn't activate, the next step is to check both the positive and negative side of the battery to make sure that the wires are securely connected. If you can move the wires, you don't have good connection. If they are loose, tighten them and then try engaging the motor. If the motor doesn't activate, the next step is to check all the wiring starting with the plug. In order to prevent damage to the electronics due to arcing, disconnect the positive wire from the post of the battery. To check the connections in the male plug, you need a flat head and Phillips screwdriver. To gain access to the wiring post, use the flathead screwdriver to loosen the two outer screws at the base of the plug. Then use the Phillips head screwdriver to loosen the screw at the end of the plug. After removing the screws, pull back the outer casing and check to make sure both connections are tight with the Phillips head screwdriver. Once both connection screws are tightened, put the male plug back together. Reconnect the positive terminal and test the system. The next step to take if the motor still doesn't activate is to check the 50 amp breaker. Unplug the male connector and then pull back the rubber boots on the 50 amp breaker. Check to make sure both connections are tight. If you have a loose wire, tighten it. Then remember to slip the rubber boots back on. Plug in the male connector and test the system. There is a way to bypass the 50 amp breaker. It is important to understand that this is a temporary test and not a wiring solution for long-term use. Serious damage can occur if the breaker is left in a bypass configuration. To test to see if the breaker is not working properly, the first step is to unplug the male connector from the tractor trailer. Then, disconnect the positive terminal from the battery. Next, pull the rubber boots, then loosen and remove the bolts on the breaker terminals. To bypass the breaker, put both sections of the wire on the copper side of the breaker and tighten down to make sure it is a tight connection. Put the boot back on. Reconnect the male connector to the tractor trailer and test the motor for activation. The next option, if the motor still doesn't activate, is to follow the wires back from the battery in the tractor up to the trailer's male plug, making sure there are no loose or exposed wires. Also, check the wiring where it connects to the arm to confirm that there are no exposed wires. Unplug the male connector. Untighten the bolts to the male connector junction and pull it out. Pull back the insulation and use a Phillips screwdriver to check the screws for tightness. Push the insulation back on and reattach the connector junction. On the inside of the tractor trailer, there are two male-female connections to check. Check each one and make sure they are tight. With the 50 amp breaker reassembled, the next test to perform if the motor doesn't activate is the wiring going to the motor itself. Remove the rubber boots and check to make sure that the positive and negative connections aren't loose. Once you are sure both wires are tight, move the rubber boots back into place. Continuing the checklist for various wiring connections, make sure that the male connector is unplugged from the tractor trailer, then go to the junction box and check the connections from your power and your motor. Then, inside your junction box, check your power connections for both red positive and black negative or ground. If you can rotate the fasteners with your fingers, they are too loose and need to be tightened. Replug the male connector to the tractor trailer and test the motor. There are times when the tarp gets stiff due to cold weather, frost, or snow. This could cause the motor to stop moving the roller just after a few feet. There could also be an obstruction that could cause the tarp to stop moving. This is the time to check the condition of the tarp before adjusting the amp dial. This adjustment will allow the motor to continue to open or close the tarp when there is an increase in resistance. To adjust the amp dial, open the junction box and look for the blue dial towards the top. Rotate the dial counterclockwise a few clicks. It is wise to set the dial back once the weather warms up again. A great feature for this system is the remote control. To use the remote, hold the on-off button for about 5 seconds to activate the motor. The up arrow is tapped to open the tarp, and the down arrow is for close. To turn the remote off, just tap the on-off button again. If the remote is inactive for more than 10 minutes, it will automatically turn off. Sometimes there may be an issue with the remote not operating the motor. One thing you can do is to reprogram the remote. To reprogram the remote, open up the junction box and look for the black button. Hold your remote away from the junction box and hold down the black button in the junction box until the red light turns on. Once the light turns on, let go of the button and tap the up arrow on your remote. The red light will flash, and then you hold the remote's on button and the motor should activate. To manually override the electric motor, remove the bolt from the shaft near the motor. At the back of the tractor trailer, connect the manual crank. Install the lock pin from the crank assembly and rotate the manual crank to open the tarp. For more information on the general operation of your tarp system, contact your dealer or give us a call at Sioux City Tarp, 888-258-6939. You can also visit our website at siouxcitytarp.com.